There are people whose presence bends a room before a word is spoken. Their silence is not emptiness, but a quiet force, a subtle command that others feel before they understand why. To command without words is to wield influence through observation, calm, and an unshakable steadiness of being. It is a power that does not demand attention. It invites it. In these moments, you notice how others shift, how tension softens, how assumptions pause. There is no clash, no rebuttal, no performance. Only the gentle gravity of a mind fully aware of itself. Machiavelli understood this invisible art, that true authority is felt, not declared, and that those who can remain silent in the midst of provocation often hold the deepest sway over hearts and minds. There is a quiet moment that often goes unnoticed, the pause before words fill the air, the stillness when expectation waits for reaction. In that fragile space, influence begins to stir. People are not merely shaped by arguments or commands. They are drawn, subtly, by the presence of someone who does not need to speak to be heard. The person who masters this art understands that every glance, every posture, every measured breath communicates far more than words ever could. Silence, in this sense, is not emptiness. It is a language spoken fluently by those who have learned that presence itself is persuasion. From the outside, it may seem as if nothing is happening. A colleague hesitates, a room grows still, a conversation shifts subtly, but the observer knows otherwise. Every movement is a signal, every micro-expression a ripple in the social current. To remain unreactive, to listen fully while withholding immediate judgment, is to wield an unseen force. Machiavelli, writing centuries ago, understood this deeply. He spoke not of loud proclamations, but of invisible threads that connect observation, patience, and strategic calm. True power, he suggested, is often felt rather than seen, understood rather than announced. The mind that recognizes this power is attentive. It notices the patterns in human behavior, the flicker of the eye when someone feels exposed, the tension in a hand that hovers uncertainly, the slight lean that signals deference or challenge. There's poetry in these small, nearly invisible movements. To command without words is to read these signals, to align your own stillness with the flow of the moment, and to allow others' actions to reveal themselves in response to your calm awareness. Here, restraint is not submission. It is calculation, intentionality, a gentle mastery that does not demand recognition, yet draws it inevitably. Emotionally, this realization is both unsettling and liberating. It challenges the instinctive need to assert oneself, to fill silence with justification or argument. It asks the observer to trust that presence alone can speak louder than words. At first, this trust may feel fragile. One might question, are they noticing? Do they understand? Will silence be mistaken for weakness? And yet, over time, the person who practices this art discovers that absence of speech does not equal absence of influence. On the contrary, it magnifies perception, creating a gravity that pulls attention, respect, and subtle compliance toward them. This awareness also cultivates empathy. When one watches without rushing to interject, the mind begins to understand others' hidden motives, anxieties, and desires. The silent observer senses the fragility behind bluster, the uncertainty behind confidence. Influence is no longer about domination. It is about alignment, guiding interaction through the mere suggestion of presence. People unconsciously adjust to those who hold themselves with quiet steadiness, and the power of their authority is reinforced by what is not said. The recognition of silent power is therefore both tactical and profoundly human. It requires patience, reflection, and a willingness to let external validation fall away. To command without words is to inhabit a state of observation that is active yet unobtrusive, assertive yet gentle, perceptive yet reserved. Here, Machiavelli's insight resonates. Power is not merely the loudness of your voice. but the resonance of your being. In these early moments of awareness, the mind begins to see that influence is inseparable from presence, and that mastery of this subtle art transforms every interaction into a landscape of possibilities rather than a battlefield of reaction. In this stillness, one discovers the hidden potency of restraint. The eyes that watch without interruption, the posture that holds firm without tension, the breath that remains unhurried, all become instruments of silent authority. The room itself begins to respond. The currents of thought and feeling bend gently, as if drawn toward a gravitational center they cannot name. And within this quiet power, the observer realizes that commanding without words is not a skill reserved for the ambitious. It is an intimate, reflective understanding of human nature itself, a recognition that presence can speak louder than any argument, and that true authority is most often invisible, yet unmistakably felt. The ability to command without words is rarely born overnight. It grows quietly, shaped by early experiences that teach the mind the value of restraint, observation, and subtle influence. Often, it begins in rooms where voices are sharp and expectations heavy. A child notices quickly that some words invite conflict, that speaking up may provoke more tension than it resolves. In these formative moments, silence becomes survival, not out of fear alone, but as an instinctive calibration of power. The young mind begins to understand that influence need not be loud. It can be measured, patient, and profoundly effective when exercised with care. In households or classrooms, children learn patterns of attention and deference. They see how adults sway interactions with a glance or a pause, how the quiet presence of one person can calm, shift, or even command a room without a single assertion. It is in these early observations that the seeds of silent authority are planted. A glance withheld, a comment delayed, a reaction restrained, all teach the child that presence itself carries weight. Over time, these experiences fuse with temperament, and the individual discovers that control need not come from dominance, but from the subtle orchestration of social and emotional currents. There is also an emotional dimension to these origins. The mind, even in youth, recognizes the fragility and complexity of human intention. A quiet child may sense the unspoken tensions between peers, the hidden anxieties behind authority figures, the silent calculations that drive behavior. Empathy and observation develop hand in hand. Those who grow into the art of commanding presence often carry an acute awareness of others' vulnerabilities, not as a tool of manipulation, but as a compass for navigating interaction. They learn that patience and attention are far more effective than immediate defense or assertion. Formative experiences also teach the mind about timing, the rhythm of speech, the impact of stillness, the way presence can precede persuasion. A teacher's expectation, a parent's gaze, a peer's subtle gesture, all convey lessons in alignment, patience, and influence. The child who internalizes these lessons practices restraint intuitively. Over the years, it becomes second nature to observe, reflect, and choose when to act or remain silent. Authority begins to feel less like a performance and more like a natural extension of being. Machiavelli, in his writings, hints at this understanding. Power is often described as an external struggle, a series of moves and countermoves. Yet the silent observer knows that true influence starts within. By understanding human behavior, one cultivates a presence that guides without forcing, that resonates without speaking, that shapes outcomes by embodying calm and attention. This is the psychological inheritance of early lessons, an internal architecture of awareness that eventually manifests as strategic influence. The origins of commanding presence are therefore a blend of environment, observation, and temperament. They are subtle, almost imperceptible, and often invisible to others. Yet, these early experiences cultivate a mind that is attuned to nuance, a heart that appreciates complexity, and a soul that values influence over control. The individual learns to navigate social landscapes not with force, but with grace, using observation and timing as the instruments of authority. By the time adulthood arrives, these lessons have been deeply internalized. The one who can command without words carries a lifelong awareness of human behavior, an instinctive understanding of timing, and an emotional intelligence that rivals the most deliberate strategies. The power of presence, cultivated through years of quiet observation and reflection, becomes a natural state, effortless, subtle, and profoundly effective. It is not learned in books alone, nor taught in classrooms. It is lived, experienced, and absorbed through the delicate interactions that shape a human life. The power to command without words is not merely a poetic notion. It is rooted in the intricate architecture of the human brain and the subtle mechanics of social behavior. Neuroscience reveals that individuals capable of silent influence often possess heightened activity in areas responsible for emotional regulation, empathy, and attention. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning and deliberate thought, works in concert with the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors conflict and guides social decision-making. Together, these regions allow the mind to pause, to observe, to assess, and to respond, or refrain from responding, with precision. This restraint, far from weakness, reflects a profound form of cognitive self-mastery. Choosing silence over reaction requires the ability to tolerate uncertainty, to endure tension, and to delay gratification. It is the mind's way of prioritizing long-term clarity over immediate emotional satisfaction. The subtlety of this process is often invisible to observers. A glance may seem idle, a pause hasn't. Yet beneath the surface, the individual is actively reading cues, calculating implications, and aligning perception with intention. The unspoken message is carried not in volume, but in presence itself. Psychologists describe this capacity as a blend of emotional intelligence and metacognition, the awareness of one's own thought patterns and the understanding of others' mental states. By recognizing the undercurrents of fear, pride, or desire in those around them, the silent observer gains insight into motivation and vulnerability. They learn which provocations are worth addressing and which will dissipate if met with stillness. This self-regulated vigilance allows for influence without assertion, for command without confrontation. The physiological manifestations of this ability are subtle but telling. The heart rate may remain steady under provocation. Microexpressions are carefully calibrated. Posture and gaze project calm assurance. Each of these cues communicates authority without a word. Human beings are exquisitely sensitive to such signals. Even the slightest shift in demeanor can guide interactions, redirect tension, or elicit compliance. Machiavelli, centuries ago, intuited this principle. He emphasized appearances, timing, and perception as tools of power. Yet modern science now validates these ideas through measurable neural and behavioral patterns. Another aspect of this psychological phenomenon is the engagement of what some researchers call social resonance networks, areas of the brain that allow one to feel, anticipate, and mirror the emotions of others. A person skilled in silent command taps into these networks instinctively, sensing hesitation, desire, or anxiety in others. This awareness informs subtle movements, choices of attention, and a modulation of presence. Influence, then, is a dialogue of perception, an unspoken negotiation, a form of mastery that unfolds in the spaces between words and gestures. Importantly, commanding presence without words is not manipulation in the conventional sense. It is an alignment of perception, intention, and self-regulation. The mind learns to weigh the impact of each action, to measure the rhythm of social currents, and to harness the unspoken power that emerges from clarity and calm. It is a demonstration of inner equilibrium, where ego, fear, and impulse do not dominate, and where observation itself becomes an instrument of authority. In essence, the silent commander is both scientist and artist, blending intuition with empirical understanding of human behavior. The neurological, psychological, and social dimensions converge to create a presence that guides subtly, influences profoundly, and commands effortlessly. Science provides the framework. The lived experience of observation and restraint completes it. What appears as quiet stillness is, in reality, a deeply engaged mind, orchestrating influence with precision, patience, and understanding. Even the most disciplined presence carries its own storms. The mind, trained to observe, is not immune to desire, pride, or instinct. Within the silent commander, a tension brews, a quiet, persistent struggle between impulse and restraint. The urge to explain, to justify, to assert one's truth rises, often at unexpected moments. It can appear as a flicker in thought, a tightening in the chest, a restless hand hovering over action. This internal friction is neither unusual nor shameful. It is the shadow of humanity, the echo of survival instincts honed over millennia. The conflict is most acute when provocation is personal. A word spoken with hidden malice, a glance loaded with judgment, or a subtle challenge awakens an instinctive response. The mind whispers, defend, clarify, strike back. Yet the practiced observer resists. The pause becomes a battlefield, each heartbeat a reminder that reaction may betray intention. Here, restraint is not a passive act. It is active, deliberate, a test of self-mastery against the natural currents of emotion. Psychologically, this resistance emerges from the interplay between the limbic system, which drives fight-or-flight responses, and the prefrontal cortex, which regulates reason and planning. The tension between these regions manifests as emotional noise, an internal dialogue of should I versus should I not. Even with awareness, the body may betray the mind. Subtle shifts in breathing, micro-expressions of irritation, or fleeting flashes of impatience. Mastery lies not in suppressing these signals entirely, but in acknowledging them, observing them, and allowing them to flow without dictating action. This struggle is deeply human because it exposes the fragility of ego. To command without words, one must relinquish the immediate satisfaction of proving correctness, of asserting superiority. The temptation to respond is the lure of validation, a siren call that promises control through confrontation. Resisting it requires a cultivated sense of patience, an understanding that influence is often most potent when unforced, and that silence can convey more than speech. The quiet mind realizes that some battles are irrelevant, some provocations transient, and that the act of not defending is itself a subtle assertion of power. Emotional intelligence plays a central role in this inner negotiation. The silent observer discerns not only their own impulses, but also the motivations of others. They sense the pride, fear, or uncertainty beneath challenges, and recognize how yielding to impulse may escalate tension unnecessarily. The mind becomes a mirror, reflecting patterns without judgment, anticipating reactions without compulsion. In this space, the internal struggle is transformed from conflict to insight, a laboratory for understanding both self and others. Yet resistance carries its own costs. The tension can feel isolating. To remain silent while the world expects engagement is to swim against instinctual currents. Doubt creeps in. Are you weak, hesitant, or misjudging? The mind must navigate these waters carefully, balancing reflection with discernment. Every act of restraint becomes a rehearsal in emotional fortitude, an exercise in aligning presence with purpose. The reward is subtle but profound: clarity, composure, and a sense of unspoken authority. Ultimately, the inner conflict is not a flaw, but a necessary stage of mastery. It is the crucible in which self-regulation, empathy, and strategic awareness are forged. Those who can endure this tension without capitulation discover that true command does not demand immediate action, that influence does not require overt assertion, and that the mind, when tempered by patience, can wield presence as power. Here, Silence is no longer absence. It is choice, awareness, and quiet strength, cultivated through struggle and sustained through insight. There comes a moment when the mind sees clearly, a quiet awakening that shifts perception without fanfare. The subtle art of presence, honed through restraint and observation, reveals its hidden potency. The silent observer recognizes the futility of reaction, the limitations of argument, and the often unseen consequences of asserting oneself unnecessarily. In this space, the act of commanding without words becomes not a strategy of avoidance, but a method of alignment, a realization that power resides as much in stillness as in speech. The turning point often arrives unexpectedly. It may be a pause in a conversation where the absence of reply transforms tension into reflection. It may be a glance received from another, unreciprocated by ego, that dissolves their need to dominate. Or it may emerge internally, as the mind notes patterns previously ignored. The predictability of anger, the transient nature of offense, the subtle cues that reveal a deeper truth. In these quiet revelations, the observer understands that control is rarely won through confrontation, but through patience, presence, and perception. Psychologically, this moment is underpinned by recognition of social and emotional dynamics. The silent individual perceives the interplay of desire, fear, and expectation in others. They witness how defensiveness, pride, and impulsivity distort interactions. By refusing to engage in the expected reaction, they disrupt patterns of manipulation or provocation. Others may become unsettled, uncertain of how to influence, while the observer maintains clarity. This insight is profound yet understated. Authority does not always require assertion. Influence is a byproduct of presence and awareness. Emotionally, the turning point can feel both liberating and humbling. The urge to prove oneself, to explain, to respond, no longer dominates thought. Instead, there is a sense of spaciousness, a recognition that the self is not defined by the judgments of others or the need for validation. The observer sees the delicate balance between action and inaction, understanding that patience is not passivity and silence is not surrender. Power, once imagined as something wielded through words or force, is reframed as something emanating from self-mastery, insight, and composure. Symbolically, this realization often mirrors moments of reflection in solitude, a quiet room, a dimly lit corridor, a mirror reflecting a calm, unreactive face. In these spaces, the observer measures the weight of thoughts, the patterns of emotion, and the rhythm of internal dialogue. They see how the energy once devoted to defending, convincing, or controlling can be redirected toward awareness, understanding, and subtle influence. It is a shift from reactive to reflective, from immediate gratification to long-term insight. This turning point is also a recognition of humility. To command without words is to accept that the world will continue regardless of one's insistence on being understood or validated. It requires letting go of the compulsion to dominate, to clarify, or to persuade. In embracing restraint, the individual discovers a profound sense of agency. They can shape outcomes not by force, but through presence. Others respond not to threats or arguments, but to the quiet authority that emanates from composed observation. Ultimately, the realization transforms perception of self and others. Silence becomes a tool, observation a form of intelligence, and restraint a source of subtle influence. The observer understands that the mind's constant need to react can obscure clarity, while measured presence illuminates it. In this quiet mastery, the once overwhelming compulsion to defend dissolves. What remains is a calm, steady awareness, an inner command that requires no declaration, yet exerts influence through its very existence. As the inside of stillness settles, a gentle transformation begins. The mind that once bristled at every perceived slight now learns to rest in observation. Silence, once uneasy, becomes a sanctuary. The act of not reacting, of holding space without intrusion, breathes calm into previously turbulent thoughts. Emotional wounds, stirred by constant defense, slowly soften. Each pause, each withheld rebuttal, is a small exercise in self-compassion, a reaffirmation that one's worth does not depend on the validation of others. Healing emerges in layers. The first is cognitive, a recognition that reacting impulsively often compounds conflict rather than resolving it. The second is emotional, the acceptance that discomfort, criticism, and challenge do not diminish the self. And the third is social, the understanding that others' need to provoke or dominate reflects their own unrest, not a deficiency in one's presence. Integration occurs as these layers coalesce. What was once an instinct to defend transforms into deliberate awareness, a conscious alignment of thought, emotion, and action. In practical terms, this integration reshapes perception of everyday interactions. Meetings, conversations, and casual encounters are no longer arenas of assertion. The observer feels the subtleties of energy, mood, and intent without reacting. They notice micro-expressions, tonal shifts, and hidden tensions, yet they respond with presence, not counterforce. The power of silence, when consistently applied, creates space for others to reveal themselves honestly. It cultivates trust, diffuses hostility, and allows influence to arise organically. Emotionally, this phase nurtures resilience. Past hurts, anxieties, and unprocessed fears are acknowledged without attachment. There's a growing ability to watch discomfort pass, like clouds moving across a muted sky. The mind learns to distinguish between immediate threat and perceived challenge, reducing unnecessary tension. Self-esteem stabilizes not through confrontation, but through acceptance of one's own capacity to witness and endure. In this stillness, a subtle joy emerges, a sense of freedom that comes from being unbound by external pressures or expectations. The integration also refines boundaries. By choosing when to engage and when to remain silent, the observer asserts subtle authority over personal space. This is not aggression, but self-respect. Others, sensing the calm consistency, adjust unconsciously. Attempts to provoke or manipulate are met with gentle resistance, not reactive force. Presence, practiced and intentional, becomes a form of soft influence, commanding without speech, shaping outcomes without conflict. Symbolically, healing and integration can be imagined as light filtering through fractured glass. The pieces, once jagged and sharp, now allow illumination to pass through with subtle beauty. Shadows of past conflicts remain, but they no longer dominate the visual field. In quiet reflection, the observer appreciates their own journey, the tension, the restraint, the growth. Each moment of not defending oneself becomes a thread in the tapestry of understanding, resilience, and inner mastery. Ultimately, this phase is not about perfection. It is about harmony between thought and emotion, action and restraint. It is about cultivating a mind that can witness chaos without being consumed, a heart that can feel tension without reacting, and a self that can navigate the world with measured presence. Through repeated practice, the observer internalizes the profound truth that power is not always in words or deeds. It often resides in the space between them. In embracing silence, patience, and observation, the individual integrates not just a strategy, but a philosophy. They learn that healing is less about erasing conflict than about moving through it gracefully. And in this integration, they discover the quiet strength of commanding without words, the subtle authority of presence, and the freedom of being unshaken by the turbulence of the external world. There is a rare dignity in silence, the kind that does not shout, does not justify, does not demand recognition. It is a quiet power, subtle yet undeniable, born from patience, observation, and the willingness to remain unprovoked. In a world that prizes reaction, the one who moves without immediate response becomes a mirror for truth, reflecting not what is said or done, but what is felt beneath the surface. Presence becomes a language of its own, delicate, deliberate, and profoundly human. The mind that once rehearsed defenses now rests in calm awareness. Each imagined confrontation, each overthought gesture, no longer carries the weight of necessity. What was once a constant rehearsal of reactions has dissolved into a soft rhythm of observation. The observer begins to recognize the beauty of unclaimed spaces, the pauses, the silences, the moments between words, where meaning often resides more clearly than in speech. In these spaces, clarity blooms. The need to correct, to assert, or to prove oneself diminishes, replaced by the gentle authority of presence. This reflection is not passive. It is active in subtle ways. Eyes notice micro-expressions, gestures, and subtle shifts in energy. Yet, there is no rush to respond, no compulsion to intervene. The observer is fully present, allowing interactions to unfold without interference. In doing so, they cultivate empathy, insight, and a rare form of influence. Power, in this sense, is not seized. It emerges quietly, like the slow dawn over a muted landscape, soft but undeniable. There is also liberation here. The overthinker, the cautious child, the rehearsed adult within each of us, finds respite. The endless mental looping, the imagined defenses, the rehearsed rebuttals, all soften into understanding. Each self, once a potential adversary, now becomes a guide. Lessons of fear, vulnerability, and survival are transformed into wisdom. The mind realizes that defending oneself was never a flaw. It was a language of protection, an instinctive script written long before presence became a choice. Poetically, the world itself mirrors this transformation. Shadows no longer feel threatening. They become part of the texture of life. Words spoken in haste float past without weight. Interactions are seen as currents, not battles. Each encounter is a chance to witness, not conquer. And in this witnessing, the observer discovers the subtle art of command, a gentle, unspoken authority that needs no justification, a quiet mastery that requires no aggression. The essence of presence lies in acceptance, acceptance of complexity, imperfection, and contradiction. To command without words is to move through the world with soft certainty, to hold one's space with dignity, and to honor the unfolding of every moment without interference. In this, there is profound freedom, the freedom to feel without reacting, to observe without judgment, and to live fully in the interstitial spaces between thought and action. Ultimately, this philosophy is a reflection of what it means to be human. It acknowledges fear, doubt, and the compulsion to defend, but it also honors restraint, patience, and insight. It teaches that strength is not always visible, that influence is often subtle, and that the mind's quiet mastery can speak more powerfully than the loudest argument. In presence, in silence, and in deliberate observation, there is both wisdom and grace. And so, the overthinker, the silent observer, the one who has learned the gentle art of presence, carries forward with a calm authority that needs no proof. Life is no longer a series of battles to be won, but a landscape to witness, a terrain of emotion, thought, and connection that unfolds with quiet poetry. In choosing presence over defense, they discover the timeless truth that power does not always come from action. Sometimes it comes simply from being fully, deeply, unshakably present.